We gotta have a serious talk about Warzone. Everyone's talking about it, so
So by now, I think you've
we
all
gotta talk
seen
about it
that Call of
too.
Duty and specifically Warzone isn't in a great spot right now. People are mass quitting the game and everyone is throwing their fingers in different directions on why the game is dying. And I wanted to make this video to give you my perspective on the state of Warzone, and I think the game is dying really for three specific reasons.
All
And I
right,
haven't
we're in
seen
it.
some of these reasons talked about. Now before I get into the first reason, I
gonna-
do want to say that I don't think Verdansk is going to magically save this game. I've seen people talk about online about how when Verdansk comes back, it's going to bring us back to the glory days of Warzone 1. And I just don't think that that's the case. I think that
So first off, I think it's 50-50 with Verdansk returning. Two, I think the three issues he's gonna talk about, which I have talked about in the past with other videos, is one being cheaters, hackers. Two, um, well, I guess Ricochet would count with the cheater hacker situation, so that's the one. Two would be server stability, and three, just keeping the freshness of the game, updates, map map updates, I guess quality of life features, if you will.
nostalgia
gonna
can only
address
get you
this
so
as?
far in gaming. And, you know, Call of Duty's been living off nostalgia now for several years by remaking some of our classic Call of Duty games. And I just think people are kind of fed up with getting fed nostalgia and, you know, not having some of these core issues with the game, you know, being fixed. So speaking of that, let's get into the reasons of why this game is dying. Oh, and by the way, this video is going to be a little bit different from my typical video. It's going to be more of my unfiltered opinion on the state of Warzone because I think this topic is really important.
It's
and I
a
don't
hot
want to
take
edit
right
and then
now.
sugarcoat what I'm about to say. So let's start with the
It's a very
absolute
hot
number
take.
one reason why I think most people are quitting this game. Now, when I play a game, the number one rule that I'm always looking for is that game fair, right? Like if I'm playing a competitive game, I want to be on the same equal playing field as my competitors.
True.
And if the game is designed to be unfair, well, you aren't playing a competitive game. You're basically gambling. And that's what I've been feeling like lately when I play Warzone.
That's
I feel like I'm
interesting.
gambling with my time. And there's a lot of reasons for this. And the number one is cheaters. Unfortunately,
There it
right
is.
now with Call of Duty and with the Ricochet anti-cheat, cheating
One
is
for
really
one.
bad right now. And it's not just people who are aimbotting you out of the sky and making it look really blatant. A lot of it is wall hacks and people who are basically able to see you through walls, and it's pretty difficult to tell, you know, whether or not someone's doing
Cheating
that.
or not,
And then on top of
correct.
that, there's an exploit right now where basically cheaters can send a bunch of packets to the servers and then just crash the game server.
Which I've discussed
So
in
if
a
you get lucky
previous
enough
video.
to actually kill the cheater in the game, well, they can just crash the game and pretty much ruin your experience. And then you end up just wasting, you know, 15, 20 minutes of your time that you spent playing that game. And, you know, it's pretty much all for nothing. Now, the cheating has been bad before, and this isn't a new issue, but I feel
Correct.
like with all of the news and updates we've gotten on Ricochet and how much Call of Duty talks about, you know, this amazing anti-cheat program, we would just expect there to be a decline in cheaters overall, you know, as time goes on, and we just aren't seeing that. But it goes deeper than this when it comes to fairness in the game. Another big thing is the servers. I don't know what it is exactly, but depending on the server that I get in Warzone right now, it oftentimes feels like a coin flip on whether or not I win my gunfights.
True.
It doesn't feel like it comes down to my skill level or how accurate I am with my gun. It really just feels like the server. Sometimes it feels like my bullets aren't registering. Sometimes I'm getting shot 10 feet behind the wall because of desync. And a lot of it just is these inconsistencies in the server
Wow.
performance that
Those are
just
good
makes
shots,
it
by the
feel
way.
like I'm not
Really
in
good shots.
control over how well I'm doing in the game. Now, I've seen a lot of people talk about the Warzone server tick rates and how low they are and, you know, how they don't match up to industry standards. And for anyone who doesn't know, basically the server tick rate is how frequently the game is updating. And theoretically, like the more updates you get from the server, just the more accurate the server is to what's happening in real time. Because anytime you play an online game, you have to realize that it's basically just like smoke and mirrors. You know, what you're seeing on your screen looks like it's happening in real time, but you have to remember that you're connecting to people that may be, you know, living across the world or
Yeah.
across, you know, the country from you,
Or even
and
just
it's
right
not
next door,
all
for
happening in
that
real
matter.
time. Basically, this data is getting sent to a server, and the server is interpreting this data. So it's not just the server tick rates that are important. You know, there's things like netcode and lag compensation, and I'm not like a network expert by any means, but it just seems like overall the quality of the Warzone servers and the Call of Duty servers is very, very low. And it just seems like, you know, Activision has not invested in keeping these servers, you know, at the higher end
the
of the industry
best, at the
standard.
best.
And you just get a lot of servers and a lot of gunfights that just feel really inconsistent. And this adds to this feeling of, you know, I'm just gambling with my time where the outcomes of my match aren't based on my own skill level. It's just based on kind of what the game is determining for me. And then on top of that, one of the biggest like random factors with this game, and this has been an issue for a long time, and it's really been like one of my sticking points with this franchise, is how bad the audio is in this game. I mean, at the end of the day, we're playing a battle royale, and there's just so much randomness in what can happen in that game, from where people can be, you know, where opponents can be on the map.
True.
And you really have to rely on your ears and the audio cues that you get from the game to just know where.
Yeah, you can't rely solely on one specific thing. You have to have some sort of awareness. You have to have some sort of awareness. You can't just be crouch walking everywhere. You can't be just focusing on like the map, for example. You can't just focus on hearing. You have to have all sorts of awareness. Because if you don't, then you're kind of screwed in this game.
Where people are, and the audio is just so inconsistent and so bad in this game that there's just so many times you get lasered in the back by someone who's sprinting at you full speed, and you just have like pretty much no time to react because of the relatively fast time to kill in this game. So once again, it just feels like you could be having this amazing game and it's just ruined by this moment where, you know, you just don't get good audio on somebody and you just don't have a chance to react, and that's just not a fun experience to have. And the audio has gotten so bad in this game that you now have people, you know, who have basically figured out really clever ways to improve the audio. And you know, kudos to those people. You know, I'm happy that, you know, they found success doing that. And there's nothing wrong with, you know, what these people are doing to improve the audio. But I just think that from a game level, like quality standpoint, it should never get to that point. Like, you should never let the audio get so bad in a game that you have to have like third party companies come in and basically, you know, redo your audio to make it so that you can actually play the game.
And he's talking about how Art is War has his audio, but he's always coming up with something for the game because he knows how it is. He's played it. He knows how it gets, and he's trying to help the people. He's not trying to ruin it for anyone, but he's trying to help the people. But you shouldn't need it if the game audio is already good.
Game. And I'm not talking about standard audio adjustments like adding a little bit of EQ to adjust for your headphones or adding some compression
or
here
paying
and there.
for it.
What I mean is you shouldn't have to download a bunch of third-party programs just to have decent audio in the game. The audio should be pretty good out of the box, and then maybe you could do some minor tweaking just to make it the best it can be. At the end of the day, like, the audio is 50% of your gaming experience, right? You know, obviously you have the visuals, but then you also, like, the audio is so important, and I just feel like the audio in Warzone has always gotten a back seat when it comes to quality and support, and it just really, really negatively impacts my experience playing the game when I can't rely on the audio. So once again, it goes back to this feeling of unfairness, because oftentimes it just seems like a lot of gunfights comes down to who got better audio on who in the gunfight. And then another specific issue that I've seen here recently with the integration is for like the more casual based players. You know, we've had just this abnormally long time that it takes to level your guns in Warzone. And, you know, if you're trying to...
And it wasn't bad initially. I think you needed to grind for it, yes, but it's like going back to Warzone 2 and Modern Warfare 2 of 2022, I believe, where you had to, if you unlocked, I think, let's say the PP, no, let's go with one of the SMGs, right? Like the MP5 from Modern Warfare 2. You have to unlock up to a certain level to use an attachment on an AR, but you put it on that AR, you have to get it to level whatever, and then if you want to use an attachment on an LMG sniper, you have to. So it's so weird how they're thinking about this.
To play this game with guns that aren't max level, you're just at such an inherent disadvantage, you know, when you're playing. And that's just been like, I guess, a retention hack that Call of Duty's been using for quite a long time, which is, you know, make the gun leveling take longer so that people play the game longer, so they can kind of boost their numbers.
Which is
and,
weird.
You know, show investors that, you know, people are playing the game more.
It,
but at the end of the
Makes
day,
sense.
like, it just really hurts that casual player. Because, you know, a lot of people don't have, you know, hundreds of hours to sink into games just to level their guns to be able to then compete at a fair level. And I think that has been another big reason, you know, that has pushed people to not want to play since the integration. And then another recurring issue that I think is unfortunately going to always be an issue with online gaming, now is the issue of crossplay. At the end
Yeah.
of the day,
Oh, I
it's
didn't
never
even think
going to be
about
fair
crossplay.
when someone's playing on a
And I've said
$5,000
it before
PC
too.
versus someone who's playing on a console, because you're going to have differences in frame rates and things like that. But I will say, I don't think that Warzone has done a good job at all balancing mouse and keyboard with controller. I think that, once you get to that like more upper echelon of player on controller, aim assist.
So I guess the hot take is, do they nerf aim assist for controller, or do they buff it for keyboard mouse?
Becomes a really big issue for mouse and keyboard players, and this is coming from someone who's has experience on both inputs. I pretty much feel like when I'm playing on mouse and keyboard, I just really can't keep up with the aim assist because of how rotational aim assist basically has no delay when you're tracking someone. And I just don't think that the game has done a good job trying to retain mouse and keyboard players, because basically you're just putting yourself at a massive disadvantage if
Correct.
you're at a higher skill level playing on mouse and keyboard, because you're just going to run into a lot of very, very good controller players who are just going to just basically not miss many shots with aim assist. Now, there's definitely more reasons than this on why the game just doesn't feel fair. I could talk about the shadow ban system and how the game is basically taking legit players and putting them in a shadow ban loop where they can't even play. And that just doesn't make any sense because you have blatant hackers who just aren't getting banned. But that pretty much like covers like why this game just doesn't really feel fair at the end of the day. And it just feels like you're pretty much just, gambling your time until you can get a lobby that there aren't any cheaters, and you get a lobby where like the servers feel okay and you're actually getting, decent audio where you feel like you can have a competitive and like fair gaming experience. Now, this next reason why Warzone has gone downhill is another big reason, and it's one that I haven't seen people talk about as much, and it's that I don't think that Warzone really has a strong identity as a game. If you look at the history of Warzone, basically the business model is that it pretty much follows the updates that the multiplayer is getting each year. And if you're unfamiliar, there's basically a 3-studio system where you have Infinity Ward, Treyarch, and Sledgehammer, and they pretty much like stagger their releases year after year so that each studio can have a lot of time to develop.
They are thinking about doing it like they changed it from every other. So like one person would do it 1 year, then so like Sledgehammer 1 year, then next person next year, next person next year, then goes back to Sledgehammer. But they're thinking about doing it to a 4th year. However, that's going to work, I don't know.
And essentially, each game is pretty much like almost like a standalone entry into the franchise, where that studio has like full creative control over how the game feels, what guns it gets, that kind of stuff. And each year the game feels different. And I think that this business model works okay for multiplayer, because if you think about it from like a consumer standpoint, if I'm going to buy a game, at $60 every year, I want to feel like I'm getting a different product, right? Like if I buy a new pair of shoes, I want those shoes to feel new, right? So like with multiplayer, if I'm going to spend that money, I want to feel like the game is different from what I was just playing. But with Warzone, I think that this is very different. Warzone's a free-to-play game, and we're not like, if most players aren't paying for an update to the game, right? They're paying for individual skins, and they're paying for items on the current version of Warzone. So when you don't pay for these updates, when all of a sudden these get rolled out and now the game just feels completely different, it's just it's a very jarring experience. And it's basically like you're just like getting like something that you're not asking for, right? It makes you scratch your head because you're like, well, I really like this game a couple months ago and I spent all this money on these skins, and now this update's come along and just changed everything. And it's made, this Warzone into a new game that I never even asked for, right? And on top of that, I can't go back and play the old, game that I really enjoyed because it's a live service model and it just constantly gets updates. And unfortunately, all these different studios that work for Activision seem to have different visions of what Warzone should be and what the multiplayer should be. So you constantly get like this flip-flopping every year of like how competitive and how sweaty the game is. Like some years, like Modern Warfare 2, the game is super casual and they get rid of the movement and just make it, like really like a bare bones FPS game. And then other years you have it like, now where there's this Omni movement that's like kind of a crazy movement system. And now a lot of the casual players feel left out because it's like a more advanced movement that they're just not.
Technically, it's just a thing of, if you have, let's say, 2 hours a day, you could literally practice Omni movement and probably get it within the first 30 minutes, and the other hour and a half you're just toying with it, right? I think it's just, do you feel like playing with Omni movement or do you not feel like playing with Omni movement? Some people just want to play the game to have fun. Other people are wanting to learn the movement, but it's all
Not
preference.
used to, and it's now added a lot more skill gap to the game. And I think that just eventually, like, Warzone just needs to pick something, right? Like, do you try to go after more of the casual player base, or do you go after more of the
Competitive.
sweaty player base
Yep.
and the more competitive player base? And I just don't think that there's a unified vision for what Warzone should be and how it should
They
play
can't
as a
figure it
game.
out.
I think that you look at games like Fortnite, they've done a really good job of like keeping the core feel of the game the same,
Correct.
but having different modes that lean more into the different player bases, right? So you have like a build mode for like the super sweats, but then you have like a more like a casual mode like no build where people can just kind of hop on and
Aim and
not
shoot.
get towers built on their head. I think there's a way to do that for Warzone, right? Like you could basically have like a ranked mode or system where there's more skill gap and maybe some more advanced movement things, like maybe the grapple gun, I think it was called, from Blackout, or even having a jetpack movement system, or just
Yep.
maybe even having the Omni movement system, right? But then on the more casual modes, you go back to like the Warzone 1 movement. And I don't know exactly how it should be. I'm not the developer and I'm not
Correct.
paid to make these
Yeah, we're
decisions, but I just think that there needs to be some sort of
just
idea,
some
like there needs to be
consensus
some
or
sort of
middle ground.
identity and unified vision for what Warzone should feel like. And I'm not talking about just the mechanics either. I also mean the game modes. Like, I think one of the big fumbles that this game had was there for a while. They were basically making Battle Royale more like Resurgence because they were giving people so many different chances to come back into the game. And they basically saw the popularity of Resurgence and then tried to make Battle Royale into
True.
Resurgence. And I think you
Yeah,
also
I
saw
see it.
the reverse of that, right? Like, they added the nuke contracts to Rebirth Island
Yep.
during Warzone 3, and I think that was a bad move. And they also added the ranked mode to Resurgence because at the end of the day, I think Resurgence started as a more casual,
But then it became a
more, I guess,
sweat fest.
lighthearted version of Battle Royale, where people just didn't take it as seriously, and it was kind of meant to be more like run and gun and
Yeah.
less camping. But it eventually turned into like a more sweaty version of players playing for the win and like kind of playing like they played in Battle Royale. So I think in addition to the game overall, all of the different modes should also have a unique identity, and like that should be consistent throughout the game.
Wow.
But I can't lie, I don't know how optimistic I am that this is ever really going to get fixed, because I think with different studios creating a new Call of Duty multiplayer game every year and then trying to integrate that into Warzone, there's always going to be differences in the vision of like the Warzone game. And I think whether we like it or not, there's just a lot of people who are addicted to getting like what's the newest and latest and greatest game, and
Yeah.
that whether or not that new game is better, people are going to play what's new. We kind of saw firsthand like how powerful a new product can be, because pretty much the entire community hated Warzone 2, and
Yes,
yet you still
that is
saw
very
like
true.
the top streamers and like the top
Very
content creators
true.
go to this new game because people are just kind of obsessed with what's new. Even if the old product was better, I think a lot of people will go to whatever the new thing is because they don't want to have like, they don't want to feel like they're missing out. And what was interesting is for a period of time you could actually play Warzone 1 or Warzone 2, and the majority of
Correct.
people chose the new game. So it is kind of just like a interesting like human psychology kind of experiment. And what I think is unique about this, and what's important about it, is that I think that it's not really going to change, because basically Call of Duty can keep pumping out new multiplayer games year after year. And because it's a new product, people are going to be interested in, what's the difference of this new game, and they want to be playing the latest game, to basically, hang out with their friends and that
Yep.
sort of thing, and kind of
Yep.
be in like that cultural moment of the new game. And the problem with this is that, like I said, I think it works well for multiplayer because you're paying for this new title and you're paying for this new game. But with Warzone being so tightly integrated with multiplayer, it just doesn't really match that model, because I don't think that there is enough development time to basically take the multiplayer version and integrate it into Warzone without having a ton of bugs and a ton of quality life issues. Basically, what we've seen over time is that essentially you have like maybe 6 to 8 months out of the year where Warzone feels really good, because basically when the new multiplayer comes out, you have 2 to 3 months of bugs
Grinding.
and issues from the integration where whoever's
Well, not just the integration part, but you have a few months of grinding, and then when it integrates, then you have to worry about, okay, is everything going to transfer over basically setting wise, right? If you haven't already, otherwise You have to take note of it, remember it. Otherwise, if you have bad memory like me, all right, then you got to remember, oh shoot, what was my sensitivity at? Like, what I just put this at for me to, for me to able to play like this or whatever. It's a memory game.
is doing whatever studio is doing the integration, they basically have to go back through and fix all these different bugs.
Yeah, they
So
have to
by
fix the
then,
bugs
okay,
too.
you're in like February or so, and then for the next 6 months, there's all these quality of life improvements, and the game just gets better over time, and it's really good. But then you get towards the like later end of the summer, and now all the studios are preparing for this new yearly release, and they kind of stop updating the game, and the game
Yep.
gets really stale, and essentially you have like another
They
like
stop
2 months or
caring.
so where the game just isn't getting updates. So if you total that up, you pretty much have like 4 to 5 months out of the year where the game just isn't getting updates, or basically they're just like running around fixing all of these massive issues from the integration. So essentially you have this live service game that is like really not playable for like half the year, and I just don't see that really changing as long as Warzone is tied to the multiplayer version of the game. And I really struggle to see how Call of Duty or Activision is going to change that, because they make so much money with these yearly releases of Call of
Literally.
Duty, and I think a lot of people, myself included, like I'll buy the Call of Duty multiplayer game so that I can level up my guns for Warzone. And so that kind of tells me that I'm part of the problem, right, buying this game, because I really don't really touch multiplayer outside of Warzone. And I think a lot of people are probably in that same boat
I
where
only
they
touch it
basically
for
buy the
grinding
multiplayer
camos
game
and the
to kind of get a
weapon
head start on
leveling.
Warzone. So unfortunately, Warzone is just so tied to multiplayer from a financial standpoint that I think that there'd have to be some really massive changes in how people are buying the multiplayer game for this to ever really change. Okay, this next issue is another big one, and it really comes down to one thing. Now, there's an old saying that is, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And I think that any company out there in the world, right, like one of the hardest things to do as a company is to gain trust from your consumer.
Yes.
And I think that with Activision and the business practices, just lost the trust of the community. For years now, they've been saying that they hear the community and they're going to fix some of these core issues like cheating, like the servers,
And
having
yet
poor
they still have yet to
performance,
do
the
it.
audio being really bad, and essentially it's just never really getting fixed. And I think that like as a company, you have a certain amount of goodwill from your consumers, when you basically have such a great legacy in history like Call of Duty does, but basically making these bad business practices and kind of lying to your consumer base over and over again, you start to erode that goodwill that you
Yeah, isn't that weird how they build up this trust, right? Call of Duty, Activision, Sledgehammer, all these guys, Treyarch, they build up the trust with the community, with the player base, and like they build it up, and as soon as something bad happens, we're like, hey, didn't you just say this, this, and this? And they're like, no, we didn't. What we meant was this when we said this. It's like, huh? They're almost misleading, or it's in Inception, right? It's such a
have
weird.
until eventually you just have a community of people that just don't trust you.
Weird
And it's not
thing.
even just those core issues. I think a big hot topic for a long time has been matchmaking. There's a lot of discussion on skill-based matchmaking, whether or not you should, match players based on skill. There's been a lot of discussion on engagement optimized matchmaking, which is essentially an AI algorithm that is determining, essentially how your gaming session is going to go in terms of the amount of wins and losses. It's going to give you some easy lobbies and some harder lobbies, and basically it's an algorithm designed to keep you
swear
in the
I'm
game.
putting
And
harder
I think
lobbies
just over
24/7.
time, the average person has
swear.
become much more aware of these manipulation tactics when it comes to matchmaking and just like kind of keeping people addicted to the game. That essentially, it gets to a point where people realize that the company is basically putting profit over fun, right? Instead of making a better game by improving the quality of the servers, servers and improving the quality of the experience, it just feels like this game is looking at hacks to keep people on the game longer. It's the store is never down, right? Because they make money on the store. And it just seems like they, say all the right things in their press releases and, that say that they're working on these issues, and there just isn't really any meaningful progress towards that. And I think for a while, that works, right? Like, you can lie to your consumers for a certain period of time, but eventually people kind of, catch on and get smart. And I think that, we're at a point now where a lot of these promises just, have been empty promises, and we're now multiple years into Warzone, and people just are seeing the same issues over and over again. So essentially, people have lost trust in Activision or Warzone to right the ship. They just don't trust this company to actually make a better game and a better product. Essentially, they're just trying to, extract as much revenue from their product as possible without actually improving it. So far this video, I know, has been like a lot of doom and gloom, and I will say, and I want to make this clear, is that I still think that this game overall can be a very fun game.
Yes.
Back to my first point, I think like when the stars align, right, and like when you get a good server with no cheaters and you get good audio, the game can be a lot of fun. And I think that there are a lot of ways and things that Call of Duty can do to kind of right the ship and get things back on track to making Warzone as great as it once was. And I'm going to kind of take some of these points from Burger. He's another Warzone creator who should definitely check out his channel, which I will link in the description. And he posted a couple of steps that he would do to basically fix Warzone. And the first one is to publicly apologize to the community.
Yes.
And I think that is step number one, and is probably the most important thing. Is you really got to start rebuilding that trust. And at first it's just going to be empty words, because words without actions don't really mean a whole lot. But I think that is like the first step. The next step would be to publish a clear roadmap of like what are the changes going to be, when can we expect these changes, and this will at least hold Activision accountable. The third is to separate Warzone from multiplayer. Like I said, I think that this should happen. I am a little bit unsure of whether or not it will. It's really going to just come down to the financials of the game. But I do think that overall, if you're looking at just the Warzone side of things, I do think that it does need to be separate, because history has shown that it's just not feasible to update Warzone every year to match the multiplayer version of the game. So I just think that from a Warzone side of things, that this just has to happen for the survival of Warzone specifically. The next step is to give management of Warzone to a single studio. I think that is really important, because we want to have like one unified vision for Warzone, and we want to like stop this flip-flopping back and forth every year with a completely different game. The fifth is to take the game back as close as possible to the Warzone 1 launch. I think Warzone 1 had a great mix of skill gap with the movement system, and I think that it was just a great place for Warzone overall, and that's just a great base for like the company to build on after that. The sixth is to completely overhaul Ricochet. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. Obviously,
that's a no-brainer,
we are
for
losing
sure.
the war to cheaters, and they just need to basically bring Ricochet up to industry standards and do things similar to Valorant and other games, and really take anti-cheat more seriously. The seventh is to upgrade the quality of the servers. Also, I think a no-brainer. At the end of the day, you want people to feel like they're getting a fair chance in their gunfights, and to feel like their bullets are registering properly. So having better servers is just a must. Number 8 is they definitely need to overhaul the audio system and make audio a priority. Like I said, it's 50% of your gaming experience, and it just needs to be as good as possible to eliminate a lot of the randomness in your matches. And then they need to get the community more involved. I think one of the best things other games like Fortnite and other FPS games have done is to basically create a sandbox for players to create community run games and modified versions of games to basically just add some fun and some variety to the game. And I think that these modes are really unique and really fun, because oftentimes these modes are less competitive and it's more about just having a good time. And at the end of the day, if Activision and Call of Duty starts prioritizing having fun over profit, I think this game will be in a much better state.
I agree. Like, he's made really good points, and I think all of them need to be taken to effect. If not all of them, then a good chunk of them. But if they can't get it together, they actually might lose their player base to hackers instead of normal people. And I get hackers and cheaters are normal people, but it's that he's got some hot takes in there. he's addressed things. He's talked about it. I mean, everyone's been talking about it. But if there's something else that you think that Warzone should be fixed, I think he's really addressed what I would fix. But if there's something else, let me know. Let me know in the comments.